This is part 2 of your photosynthesis notes. You should have already completed the first part and answered the 3 review questions before coming to this assignment. If you haven't, pause now, go back to part 1 and complete that first. So with part 2, we're going to actually talk about the parts of photosynthesis, the steps. So part 1 should have been, I wouldn't say totally from your last time you learned about photosynthesis from middle school, but it should be partially. But this second set here with the steps, this is probably new for you. So there are 2 main reactions in photosynthesis that we're going to look at. There's the light-dependent reaction and the light-independent reaction. Just based on those names, what do you think the difference is? Really look at those. Light-dependent versus light-independent. Well, it's not the light part, those are the same. It's definitely that dependent versus independent. So what does it mean to be dependent? Think about if you depend on someone. That's what light dependent means. It's going to depend on something. And light independent, think about what independent means. So for this, the light dependent reaction is going to need light in order to happen. It depends on light. This is the first stage of photosynthesis. Sometimes this is even called the light reaction. The plant is going to need sunlight to do this process and to start photosynthesis. Remember, sunlight was one of our main reactants, one of our 3. It was sunlight, carbon dioxide, and water. So the plant's going to need the sunlight in order to start photosynthesis. If there's no sunlight, then there's going to be no photosynthesis because we can't start the light-dependent reaction. The other one, light independent, this can happen with or without light. It doesn't need any light. This used to be called the dark reaction, but we changed the name because the dark reaction makes you think that it has to happen in the dark. Like this is a nighttime reaction and the other one's a daytime, but that's not true. This one just means it doesn't need the light. It can happen with light around, it just isn't using the light to do anything. So the sunlight got used in the first reaction, so the second one doesn't need it. So even if there's no sunlight around, this reaction will happen. But this reaction can happen with sunlight around. I think this is really interesting because when I was younger, I learned the dark reaction, and I thought exactly that. I thought, okay, only happens in the darkness. But that's just not true. This can happen with or without light. So we're going to go through each step, starting with the light dependent. Now each one has 3 steps, so make sure these are labeled. You should have it saying right there at the top, first. Then it'll say second and third. So the first step is we've got to collect the reactants. The plant has to collect water, sunlight, and carbon dioxide. And in the last video, we talked about how it does that, but let's refresh. So plants are going to get water, either from rain or from us watering them. They're going to get sunlight from the sun, and then they're getting carbon dioxide from the air around them. You must know, I assume you know, that when we breathe in oxygen and out carbon dioxide. So there's carbon dioxide in the air from us. And then the plants are going to breathe in that carbon dioxide. So they need those 3 things. And plants take in carbon dioxide through their stoma. That's the little pores in the leaves. They take water in from the roots, and they take sunlight in their chloroplast, deep in their chlorophyll. So first, get the reactants. Second, the energy from the sunlight. Remember, sunlight's just a big ball of energy. We call that a photon. It's just a bunch of energy. The energy from that sunlight is going to move through the water, and it's going to get put onto ATP. When I say through the water, I want you to think about if you're swimming in a pool. When you're in a pool and you go underwater, is it just completely pitch black? No. The sunlight can go through the water and come down into the pool. Now, eventually it gets dark if you keep going deeper and deeper and deeper, but the water has that ability to let sunlight come through it. So in a plant, this happens. Sunlight goes through the water and it gets put onto ATP. Remember from the last one, ATP is our energy carrier. So ATP is going to now hold the energy. So we've taken it from a ball of energy that we can't touch to ATP. So we've put it on a chemical. Now I can move that energy with me to the next step of photosynthesis. The third step is that water is going to get broken down. When we throw sunlight through the water, It energizes the water to the point where the bonds break. So water is going to get broken down, which is going to leave us with oxygen and hydrogen, right? Water's H2O. Well, the oxygen is going to get released to the atmosphere for us to breathe. Now remember, it's not about us. They didn't do that on purpose. It's just happening. That hydrogen is going to move with us to the next reaction. So we have used 2 of our reactants and we've made 1 product, right? Let's look at that. We've used the sunlight energy, right? We've talked about sunlight, and we've used the water. So that's 2 of our reactants. And we've made oxygen. We've made 1 product. But we're not done. We haven't used our carbon dioxide yet, and the plant hasn't made glucose. Remember, the sugar is what the plant actually wants, so we're not going to stop until we get that sugar. So those are step 1, 2, 3 of the light-dependent reaction. So this should be the end of the light-dependent reaction. The ATP is going to go with the energy to the next reaction. Now the next reaction is light-dependent. Everybody look at your notes real quick. I think your notes here say light-dependent again, but this is the light-independent. Please look carefully at that. You might need to change it in your notes. It should be light-independent reaction this time. So in this one, the first thing that's going to happen is that the energy is going to be taken from ATP and it's going to be added into the reaction. So we're going to take that ATP and actually bring it with us. Second, the carbon dioxide is going to be added. So now we have carbon dioxide and energy. And we're going to take the hydrogen from the water that we broke down, and we're going to start building things using the energy, using the carbon dioxide, and using the hydrogen. So if you look, we have a C, some O's, and we're going to have H's from the hydrogen. We're going to break those down and build them back up into what we want. And what we want is glucose. So if you look at the formula C6H12O6, well, we got carbons from the carbon dioxide, hydrogens from the water, and oxygen from the carbon dioxide again. So we're going to build glucose. Remember, that's what the plant wanted. They wanted glucose. So we've done it. We took the energy that we made in the first reaction, we took the carbon dioxide and the hydrogen from the water, and we broke them down and built them up to make glucose. That's the end of photosynthesis. Now I want you to understand that this is a very simplified version. We can get real specific, but we don't need to, right? If this is biology for our general life, you really don't need to know any more than this. Now, if you go to college, and if you take a biology class there, they'll go into more detail, but you have the basis. So let's review this. You add water, carbon dioxide, and sunlight. Those are your reactants. You're going to get out oxygen and glucose. And that energy, we want to follow that. It goes from sunlight to glucose. So we're going from solar energy to chemical energy. Remember, glucose is made of chemicals, C6H12O6. So we're going from sunlight to chemical, solar energy to chemical energy. So now what? Well, the plant's done. The plant will keep doing photosynthesis. It never stops. But the plant's going to use the glucose it just made for its energy. So the glucose gives the plant all the energy it needs to survive. So a plant doesn't really live off sunlight. A plant uses sunlight to make food in order to use the food. So the plant's always going through some stage of photosynthesis, and that's because the plant always needs food and energy. Now I keep calling glucose food. Where do you think the plant is storing all of this glucose? Where do you think a plant stores all of this sugar? I'll give you one big hint. I want you to write that just kind of over to the side. The plant is putting this in its fruit and its vegetable. So not just there, but mostly in a plant, they're putting their glucose in fruits and vegetables. So when an apple tree makes an apple, they made all that sugar, but not for you to eat an apple. They made it for energy for themselves. You've got 3 questions now on your notes. You're going to answer those using the information we just learned. And that should be the end of your photosynthesis notes. If you have any questions, I want you to go back and listen to the video first where you're confused. And if you still don't understand, you can come talk to me, or you can check in the book and see if it helps you at all. If you need to, go ahead and rewatch this, but if not, then you're done and you can move on to the next assignment.